Live action with Adam Tuttle and his good buddy, Michèle Kline.
Hey, Michelle.
Hi, Adam. Hi, Jason.
Hi. Just realizing how old we all are. We spent 10 minutes talking about the weather before we started.
That's just you. I was playing along. I didn't want to be rude. That's just, yeah, no.
You know, I will out myself that every time it rains, I lean to my wife and I joke with her. I said, man, we really needed this rain. We really needed it. That's how I know I'm old. I love that.
Yeah. Good. Well, it's good to be with you too today. Another episode of Beyond the Binder. We're going to talk about maintaining up-to-date standards, which seems relatively simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Seems simple. Sounds simple. Not simple.
Not simple? Okay.
Not simple.
So why don't we kick off with, maybe how often do you see hotels operating with out-of-date standards? Every time. Look at Michelle.
I'll take mine. And I know that we've talked about it here before about this, but I actually think that when it comes to maintaining up-to-date standards, I think this is the hardest part of hospitality. Hands down, this is the hardest part of keeping everybody relevant, knowing what the expectations are, and them being the right ones. I can't tell you how many times the people that are coming in on on their new hire orientation are the ones that are telling the people that have been here for 20, 30 years, oh, hey, we do this. Like, no, we don't. Like, yeah, we do. They just talked about it in orientation or something like that. And I think that when it comes to running a clean organization, especially at the property level, that's super hard, let alone talk about from like a management company perspective of like, hey, how do we keep those expectations in line and up to date? That stuff's tough. And I see it, I would say regularly. Almost every hotel that's operating is probably has some version of outdated standards or practices that are being performed in the daily operation that have been requested to be updated by a general manager or RVP or from a corporate level that haven't trickled down into the daily operation yet. I don't know, Michelle, do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I can share a quick story. Back in 2020, when things shut down, I remember having multiple conversations with leaders that were either reaching out to see if I could help them clean up and update their SOPs, or they were working on it already and super overwhelmed because the standards had not been updated and the procedures had not been updated for so long. And it makes you think, like, do we need to be in a situation of chaos or catastrophe to actually sit down and pay attention to keeping our standards and our procedures up to date?
Which is like, how often is that though? That's the catalyst, right? Is, I was reading an article yesterday, literally last night. I was climbing into bed and I was reading the news, and there was a gentleman that died in Mexico who was electrocuted in his hotel jacuzzi, not like the one in the room, like at the main pool. And it was because of, the standards of checking that, facility weren't maintained. They weren't updated. They weren't regularly monitored. And you think, gosh, this poor gentleman, his poor family, there were two people that were affected. And you think, why does it take something like this for somebody to say, gosh, we should be checking this every day and then reinforce it? Or, through COVID, I had the same thing. Well, let's look at what your cleaning policies are. There's a bigger problem than just getting it up to date.
And then also, how long does that feeling last for, right? The feeling of, I'm responsible for keeping this up because this happened. So if that was the catalyst, then are you creating a habit after that? Are you looking at the process of updating your standards and how often that's going to happen? And I think that a lot of it has to do with it being a cumbersome process. It's complicated, and it's,
Yeah.
you don't want to spend time doing it. So, finding a way in which you can actually keep it up, I want to say on a daily basis, but putting a process in place and
Yes.
making the process easy so people actually do it.
I think two things on that. Sorry, Jason, I'm probably steamrolling all your questions. Is
I don't
this is
even
like,
have to ask them. You're just
I
rolling.
hold on. Let me tell you all this. When I was a hotel operator, and in my role, I actually bounced around a lot. It was like 2 years at a property and gone, right? And I don't think that that's uncommon, uh, whether that be at your property or at least within a position, right? Like 2 to 5 years or 30. I think that's the break. It's like you're either there for like 2 to 5 or like 30. There were a lot of things that I remember taking ownership of. And I was so happy to be like, I'm implementing this new process. I'm going to be doing this. And then when I left, right, and went to another property, and then I came back, 4 years later, 5 years later, and that process had never even been touched. The SOP, and you can't tell me that in 5 years you haven't changed a single thing. Like, come on. And I remember being sad about that as someone that had implemented that process. Like, man, I worked really hard to understand the mechanics and how this would work, and because I wasn't its champion, it kind of fell away. And I remember kind of looking into why did that not sustain? Like, what happened? They were like, well, we started to change a little bit and we started to do this. And then it really was what you were saying, Michèle. It just became too cumbersome to update, right? And to keep doing that. And so, for example, like when we were dreaming Yippy back in the day, that was one of the biggest things that we wanted to create was to say, gosh, like, how do I make it so that these SOPs aren't stuck in the binder, that they're not some relic collecting dust, and they became, and I don't really want them to become like sanctified documents, right? Like, oh, they're holy relics, like no one touched them and preserved them. No, like these need to be living documents. They need to be living policies or these workflows, SOPs, whatever we want to call them, need to reflect what is being happening. And sometimes that changes seasonally. Sometimes that changes, year to year after year. Maybe you've gone through a renovation and then your process changes. And so I am a huge believer, and like obviously when we were creating Yippy, is how can we make this the simplest possible? Like how can we make sure that you can make an update and it gets shared directly down to the frontline deliverable or the frontline team member that's delivering that service as quickly as possible, right? I mean, I should be able to update a standard and inform my point of service team member the same day, period. And I don't think that that's unreasonable to have that expectation anymore with the advancements in technology that we have. I know that we can do that with Yippy, and I think that's really great. That's the type of communication we need to be going for in the future, because how much better would that be? And being able to say, gosh, I can update it and it's relevant. And I think that would help a lot in operations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the pain points of executing what you've just described. Like, why is it so hard? Like, avoidance? We just don't want to do it. Or it's just like, how do you make the connection day in and day out? Like, maybe it's on the mind of the GM, but there's so many other people involved. GM can't be everywhere all at once every day.
I've got a thought, but I want to hear from Michèle first, if I can.
So I think that it's several things. On the one hand, it is absolutely critical to have a platform that will help you do that. Not only update it, but house it in one place. Because if you think about the security behind the sharing of documents within any property, not everybody has access to it. Not everyone has access to certain folders that you have in your drive, for example. So one of the things that I love the most about using Yippy and recommending it to my clients is that you really have that ability to have everything housed in one place, but then everyone that you designate will have access to it. So from there come recommendations, right? And with recommendations, people feel like they have a voice. And when people feel like they have a voice, now they are more engaged. So I think that the process is the hardest part. So not having the technology available for you to keep it up is critical. And then on the other hand, not teaching the team how they can be the owners of it, right?
Yes. And I think that that's so important when we're talking about ownership and understanding, because I was talking with a GM, or I'm sorry, a regional vice president just last week, and they were articulating it's really not fair to the general managers that we expect so much from them, like so much. Look, how many GMs really know what temperature the refrigerator needs to be according to the health department standard, or what temperature the fish needs to be held at? Maybe that's there, or what the pH levels at the pool need to be. And the problem is there are standards around that are dictated, and sometimes they're government compliance. Like, you will get shut down if you don't have that, right? And other times they're accolade standards. I mean, Forbes updates their standards every single year. Every single year, there's some type of variation, some type of update, and we see that with every accolade, right? American Express is doing that, Preferred Hotels is doing that, AAA is doing that. Marriott, IHG, Hilton, they're all updating their standards regularly. And when you think of these property leaders that are trying to just say, oh my gosh, how do I keep straight? Because all of that information is coming in silo, right? Like, there's not anyone saying like, okay, here's the collective update, right? For everything. You have to receive those updates in silo from those organizations. And then you have to try to distribute that throughout your entire organization. And understanding, oh, you're maintenance, so you need to know this, but you also run the pool, so you should know this as well. And keeping track of, like you're saying, Michèle, like the permissionings is also a nightmare. And then what ends up happening is someone that should know doesn't know, or someone that should be updated isn't updated, or more importantly, it takes a disaster or a catastrophe or some huge moment where now it's on the GM's radar, right? Like, oh gosh, okay, and now you have a really strong executive presence bearing down. And when that happens, unfortunately, that individual can only look at so many things at a time. And so I think that's been one of the pain points, Jason, is it's really hard to understand the implications of the updates, who needs to know those, because the obvious answer isn't always the right answer, or it's not the whole answer, I think is probably the better way to say that. And when you have systems that don't allow you to do that, I think that's where hoteliers really feel that struggle of saying, like, man, I'm just trying to do my best. I'm trying to keep up to date. And we rely so much on reactive feedback. So we're talking, when I say reactive feedback, I'm talking the health department comes in and inspects. Forbes comes in and does their annual audit. LQA or the brand audit comes in, and or even worse, I could say, you get a Medallia or a Qualtrics survey or whatever, I guess feedback survey that says, we didn't like this experience, or my shower was broken. And you're like, oh my gosh, well, what do you mean? Or the experience was right. So it's very reactive, which causes us to then go back and fix things, where if we were more proactive and looking at what's the expectation we have, what do we need? What do we want this experience to be? And we're constantly setting those expectations, and we're inspecting those expectations, and we're letting the people that are responsible for those own them, update them, and communicate that with their organization. I think it would make hospitality a much less stressful place to work, less heart attacks, hopefully.
Yes, less overwhelming, less frustration, less stress, all unnecessary things to feel.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How often because you mentioned updating standards often. So doesn't that produce conflict between old standards and new standards?
All the time. All the time, right? Like, well, that's how you used to do it. My first introduction to Michèle was through her awesome podcast, Walk the Floor, right? And That's what you have to do. You have to be out there on the floor with your team, managing the expectations. And sometimes you have to say, hey, that's the old expectation. And we've changed. And if you're not out there and you're not on the floor and you're not looking at things and understanding that, you can let really bad habits develop for a really long time. And I think even worse than that is you just get, hey, this is the way I do it. So and deal with it, right? And I think hoteliers deal with that a lot, especially with senior staff, is, hey, this is how I do it. No one's told me different for 25 years. And they almost feel like they're at the mercy, where if they can clearly and effectively communicate those updates, I think that those employees appreciate that, because that type of attitude to me is when employees have been left out without information and they've kind of, survive all of the fittest, and they've made it. They've made it the last 20 years doing it this way.
Adam, and how many times do we have team members, brand new team members, that are shadowing for 1 or 2 weeks, and
Yes.
more senior team member? Now that more senior team member is the one that is saying, oh, this is how we've been doing it forever, whether
Yeah.
it is because they're stubborn or they don't believe in that standard, or they simply have not been updated because it didn't trickle all the way down. So now
Yes.
you're not only dealing with that senior team member who doesn't seek that change, but that new one is creating those routines that turn into habits, and habits are very hard to break.
Mm. And if I can throw one other caveat into that, sometimes the standard doesn't match the operation. It's just like, yeah, hey, the standard is you do this. Like, hey, we
That's
can't
my
do that.
favorite.
Yeah, like we don't even come close to doing that. Like we can't do that. And so you train these employees, or your documents say, this is how we do it. You're like, well, we don't even have that chemical, so this is the one we use. Or we don't even have that process, and so this is what we do. And so your standards have to match your operation, meaning they have to align, and you have to be able to deliver, expect what you can deliver, which is, I think, the whole point, right? Is aligning those two.
As we get close to wrapping up, well, what would you suggest is a good time to introduce new standards?
That's always, frequently, regularly, is my answer. I think that we very often in the hospitality industry want to have, we're dramatic people. Okay. We're in it for the show. We're in it for the emotion. The only people that top us maybe are our theater crowd. But I think hoteliers often want to do this grand reveal, our new standards or our new SOPs. And honestly, I think that has to change. I think we have to go back to say, hey, we are constantly tweaking. We are constantly making updates, because it's easy now. It's not this huge gesture. It's not, okay, let's create a council and get us all into the room and everyone bring your binder and let's go. How about we make tweaks as they're relevant and as we receive the updates, and we're communicating that daily, weekly, monthly, or as they happen, right? We're saying, hey, we noticed that this is happening. We've made an adjustment to the expectation. Let's deliver it, and not be afraid to allow things to, I don't want to say the word fail, but allow ourselves the opportunity to find the weaknesses, or to say, why doesn't this work? We want this to happen. Here's our hope. We want to deliver this experience. Here's how I think we're going to deliver that. Oh, well, that didn't work. And then allowing that constant tweaking process. And when we have that attitude and we have the tools that enable that, and we can start tracking and getting data on success or not success, adoption, all of that stuff, I think that really is a key to delivering incredible guest experiences. Okay, that's the goal. But in more reality, delivering possible employee experiences, right? The employee feels empowered. They feel capable of delivering those experiences consistently within target and brand expectation, and with genuine heart and soul, right? That they feel it's an honest connection. I don't know, Michèle, what are your thoughts?
I would drop my mic for you, but it's latched to my desk. I agree 100%.
Yeah, we've got to. It's got to be a daily practice, or at least routine.
And on the same note of empowering your team to make those changes, to recommend those changes, it really boils down to your line level that does the work every single day and understands the struggles and the challenges and the obstacles that will give you the best insight ever.
Yeah. Like they're the ones that are connecting, and we have to align the expectations with their delivery and vice versa. We need to say, what are you doing? Guests are loving this. How do I make that the expectation of us as a company? And sometimes we when we think standards, we often think this approach, but we also need to think, this upward flow as well of, hey, we need to learn from you, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to be able to make those changes and share that broadly with the team.
Very good. Good talk. We had a good talk.
Oh, Michèle, you're the best. I love every time that you're on here. I think that every time I see Michèle, I think, get out, be with your team, like be an amazing leader. And I just love that. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. This
Yeah.
is great. Great conversation. Very insightful.
Thank you both.
Have a good day.